As property investors, one of the most common reactions we get from people we meet is, isn't property investing risky? What happens if you get a bad tenant? We've all heard the horror stories, tenants squatting, not paying rent, and inflicting thousands of rands worth of damages. We get it. It's hard not to be discouraged when you hear these types of stories. But here's the truth. Everything in life is risky if you don't learn to manage the risk properly. And in our experience, 9 out of 10 of these unfortunate stories could have easily been avoided. When it comes to tenant management, there's one simple fact to remember. If you get a bad tenant, it's not only the tenant's fault. In many cases, the blame falls squarely on us as the landlord for not having done our homework properly. We've lived by this rule for our entire investing career and have enjoyed an extremely high success rate with tenants with very few serious issues. So if you're on the fence about investing in property because of concerns around bad tenants, we're about to put your mind at ease. And make sure to stick around to the end where we discuss whether it's worth getting a rental agent to manage your property for you. But let's start by addressing the question, how do you go about securing a quality tenant? Well, we have a 5-step process you should follow.
Step 1. Place an online advert. It all starts with a professional rental advert. As with most things in life, first impressions matter. It's no different with marketing your property. There's nothing worse than an advert with blurry photos and only 2 lines of text in the description, both containing spelling mistakes and horrible grammar. If you want to attract a quality tenant, you need to take pride in the presentation of your property. That means high quality photos of every room, a detailed description of the property, and no spelling mistakes. The easiest way to do this in practice is simply to look at other rental listings, find a few which really stand out, and copy their formula. Simple. For the South African market, the 2 best sites to use for rental listings are Private Property and Gumtree. At minimum, you should be listing a property on both simultaneously. After posting your ads, you're going to start getting inquiries. And it's important to continue to set the professional tone in all your correspondence, whether it's an email or phone call.
Step 2. Pre-screen all potential tenants. One of the best tips we can give you is to pre-screen your tenants right up front. You should have a non-negotiable list of requirements which you discuss with any prospective tenant immediately, either on the initial phone call or first email. This will save you a ton of time and help avoid many potential headaches down the road. As an example, some of our major pre-screening requirements are that all our tenants should be South African citizens, full-time employed, non-smoking, and not have any animals. It's also important to ask about their family dynamic. Do they have a partner? Are they employed? Do they have kids? How many people will they be moving into the apartment? In our experience, simpler is better. The fewer people, the fewer animals you have living in your property, the lower the overall risk. And the reason we prefer local citizens over foreign citizens is because it's far easier to take legal action against a South African citizen should things go wrong. But if you want to accommodate a foreign citizen, make sure at minimum that they have a valid visa for the full duration of the lease. Now, if a prospective tenant does not meet your requirements, you should politely communicate this and move on. There's no point arranging a property viewing with a tenant who clearly is not suitable. Remember, this is a business transaction. There's no place for emotion. If you want to ensure you find a quality tenant, you need to be honest and firm with your requirements right up front.
Step 3. Arrange a viewing. Once a tenant has passed your pre-screening requirements, the next step is obviously to arrange a viewing of the property. A trick we've learned over the years is to always try to arrange a group viewing if possible, where you have more than one prospective tenant view the property at the same time. This puts subtle pressure on the parties to commit for fear of losing the property to other parties. And the sooner you get a potential tenant to commit, the better it is for you. It's a good idea to chat with each party and try get a more complete picture of what they're looking for and their character. After the viewing, be sure to give each prospective tenant a rental application form. A good rental application form will ask for all the tenant information, including previous landlord references and current employment details, request permission for credit checks, and set out the basics relating to fees and deposit requirements, amongst others. This encourages the potential tenant to formalize their commitment to the property.
Step 4. Vetting your tenant. Once you receive a completed application form, the vetting process begins. And this is by far the most important step you can take to protect your investment and reduce the risk of tenant issues down the road. Now, there are 4 non-negotiable checks that you must do before placing your tenant in your property. Check number 1, the credit check. The best way to do this is to set up an account with TPN. Go to tpn.co.za and register a free account. TPN have a bunch of powerful tools to help you screen your tenant. We especially like the 8-in-1 rent check product. It costs only 117 Rand and you get access to credit checks from multiple sources, as well as some other really useful insights. And the cost of the credit check can be passed on to the tenant. Now, if you're dealing with a couple, you should always perform a credit check on both individuals. There are many cases where one spouse with a bad credit history tries to hide behind the other, so always vet both of them.
Check number 2, employment verification. Request an employment contract or 3 months payslip from your tenant. And to go one step further, we always recommend confirming employment by picking up the phone and physically speaking with the employer's HR department. It takes less than 5 minutes and it's an important cross-check.
Check number 3, previous landlord references. This, in our experience, is the most important check you can do. Always ask tenants for 2 previous landlord references and always call both. You should question the tenant's character, whether they paid on time, whether they looked after the property well, and confirm that they were good-natured and not a nuisance to neighbors. A tenant should never be placed on your property if you were unable to obtain a positive previous landlord reference.
Check number 4, bank account conduct. It's possible to learn a lot about someone from the way they manage their finances. Request a minimum of 3 months bank statements. Bank statements reveal the truth. If your prospective tenant has no money left in the middle of the month, for example, chances are that this is a high-risk tenant. Check to confirm that the tenant can actually afford your monthly rental, that they don't have unpaid debit orders, and that they conduct their account responsibly. Also be sure to check that their rent was paid on time for the preceding 3 months. And that's it. If your applicant successfully passed all 4 checks with flying colors, you've almost certainly found yourself a quality, low-risk tenant.
Step 5, the lease agreement. The last step is to notify the tenant that their application has been successful, request payment of the deposit, and sign the lease agreement. And just in case there was any doubt, having a formal written lease agreement is an absolute must. We recommend using the TPN lease agreement available from your TPN profile. It does cost a few $100, but they have the most comprehensive lease agreements available, which are always updated regularly. Now be sure to have the lease agreement signed and the deposit paid into your account before allowing a tenant to move in. And importantly, the lease agreement should always be signed by both parties, in the case of spouses or friends sharing the property.
Now there are a few more general tips we can give you to help ensure a smooth rental process and to avoid any potential disputes. Tip number 1, always do a pre-inspection with your tenant to note any defects in your property. Take photos of the property's interior and make a written list of any damages or defective items. Anything not noted is assumed to be in good working order. Make sure to have your tenant sign an agreement. This ensures that you can hold them accountable for any damages later. Tip number 2, maintain a professional relationship with your tenant. There's nothing wrong with being polite and friendly, but never forget that this is a business relationship. Do not get emotionally involved with your tenant.
Tip number 3, always put communication in writing. If you need to have a verbal discussion about something, always follow this up by a written email to confirm the outcome of the discussion. Encourage your tenant to also make use of written communication. This ensures a paper trail if ever a dispute arises. Tip number 4, keep your property in good condition. This sets the precedent that you respect your property, making it more likely that your tenant will too. Tip number 5, a good tip is to have your tenant set up a debit order for payment of the rent 2 days after their salary is received. This eliminates the risk of late payments to a large extent, avoiding any potential for conflict.
Tip number 6, if your tenant does breach any terms or conditions set out in the lease, it is essential to hold them accountable. Notify them in writing as soon as possible and give them the opportunity to respond or rectify the issue. Never let a breach of contract slide. Any relaxations of the terms and conditions you agreed to sets a bad precedent. Not only does your tenant learn that they can get away with bad behavior, but you open yourself up to potential scrutiny if the matter ever went to court. This holds especially true for late payments of rent. If the rent is even 1 day late, the tenant should receive a formal warning letter and be asked to remedy the breach of contract immediately. Tip number 7, always ask for 2 months deposit. 1 month's deposit is just not sufficient to cover you if things ever go wrong.
Now the last thing you may want to consider is whether or not to use a rental agent to help you manage your property. Effectively managing a property and tenants does take time, and a good agent with proper experience can be an incredibly valuable asset. But agents are by no means perfect, and no 2 agents are the same. So understanding the best rental practices for yourself is so important so that you can keep your agent on their toes. This is why we like to educate new investors on the complete rental process, so they can hold their agent accountable to high standards. So should you use a rental agent or try to self-manage your property? Well, you'll have to make the decision for yourself based on how much time you have available, how hands-on you want to be, and based on your personal financial situation. For us personally, we started out self-managing our properties. It was a great way for us to save some money in the beginning, since agents charge 10 to 12% of your rent each month. We also learned a ton of valuable skills in the process. But as our portfolio grew and our time became more limited and more valuable, we began to outsource the property management role to agents.
Over the years, we've distanced ourselves from tenants completely. We never communicate with tenants anymore. All contact is handled by our rental agent, and our tenants are never given our contact information. We don't want to get late evening phone calls or deal with any issues or admin that our agent should be dealing with. This is the agent's responsibility, and it's what we pay them for. We also quickly learned that outsourcing the management role to an agent was the best way to remain professional and treat the transaction for what it is, a business transaction. Just be sure that if you do choose to outsource the management of your property to a rental agent, that you keep a close eye on them until they have proved themselves. And always ensure that they follow the strict tenant vetting criteria we mentioned earlier. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out this video, which breaks down some of our best property investment strategies. Or this video, where we show you how to maximize your tax breaks with SARS when you own an investment property.